here is Premiere, and when you open things up for the first time, you might see something that looks like this. Is this what everybody has? Okay, so let's start by even creating a new project. And within the exercise files, like I mentioned before, is also a finished project. So this is labeled Gothic Architecture Workshop, where you're gonna see the finished version. And I included this so that you can look at each one of, I'm gonna go to editing here. You can look at each one of these clips or these layers and see how I animated it. So look at all the different keyframes and take it apart step by step. But we're gonna do this together as well, but I just wanted to explain what that file is. And it is located in the Layer Animation 2021, and it's under Premiere Files, Project Gothic Architecture Workshop. Okay, but we're gonna start by creating a new one. And so if you didn't get to a place that you want with your layered Photoshop composition, you can use this Trinity Abbey Blocks Photoshop document that's located in the Media folder under Premiere Files. Okay, so I am gonna go to back to home here and go New Project. But let's start with something new. That is really, that folder is there so you can just kind of see a finished project. But I'm gonna go to New Project here, and let's name it something relevant. I don't know, I'll just call it Gothic for now. And I wanna choose my location. So that's that pathway I was talking about. So I'm gonna go to Premiere Files, Project, and I'm gonna place it in here. So just in general, when you're working with Premiere, I like to have a folder that's just all Premiere files, and then I'll have one for each of my specific projects. And then within that, I put media and project files. Media is all my content that I'm gonna work with. Project is the Adobe created files. And a lot of working with animation is organization. And so we're going to look at different ways we can organize our materials as well. Okay, so I have it there. Under video rendering and playback, if you do have this Mercury Playback Engine GPU acceleration metal available on your computer, you want to use that. It's just a faster, more efficient rendering. And rendering is when we do all of these changes, how the software interprets those changes. And so we want those to happen as quick as possible. And everything else should be good. The other thing that you can think about is a scratch disk. This looks pretty complicated, but basically what it's saying is like, where do you want all the processing to come from? And so if you're someone who has very little space on your hard drive, like your computer hard drive, you might want to designate, and you can go and browse an external hard drive, especially if you have an external hard drive that has a fast transfer rate, like a USB-C type of cord. All right, so I'm gonna press OK. Okay, so here's my project Gothic. Yours is gonna look a little bit different, probably. I'm gonna close some of these panels. Okay, so this would be something similar to what your screen looks like. Fairly blank. If you see a bunch of tutorials on the side or what have you, just go up here, and these are different window, like screen, workspace screens, and we want to choose editing, and that's gonna make things look a little bit cleaner. Okay, so now we want to import that file we just made. So we can just double click on here in this project panel. So I'm going to refer to these panels a bit. So just before I do that, I want to talk about the panels. Here's the project panel. This is where you would build your sequences, where you have different clips that you've created, and those are the pieces that end up on the timeline. The timeline is time-based, so it's really based, this is right now in minutes and seconds, and this allows us to build something in time. If I scroll down here at the very bottom, I can increase that or decrease it in size. It's just this toolbar right down here. So if you see me zoom in, that's what I'm going to be doing, is moving this toolbar here. We have the program panel, and that shows us what it looks like, and this is really important for testing our animations. And then we have this effects control panel on the left here, and this is where we'll be building those animations using something called keyframes. Okay, so if I go in here, I can double click, or I could also go to File, Import. So I'm just going to double click here, and I'm going to choose my Gothic Photoshop document. Or if you don't have one that you like, you can also choose Trinity Abbey Vendôme blocks. Okay, so I'm going to import, and it's going to show this screen. This is a really important moment here. So you can see that import as merge all layers. We don't want that, because that's going to take away all of the work that we just did in building our composite Photoshop file. What I want to do is come down here, and I want to choose sequence. When it's a sequence, you can see that each one of these objects now has become its own layer. That means I can move them around, I can change things with them. So I'm going to press OK. It's importing the files, and what it's created is a folder here. And now we need to think about organizing all of that material, because when we have something like 25 layers, it can get a little overwhelming just visually. And so thinking about some ways that we can make it easier for ourselves. So I want to select this Gothic folder, whatever the name that you chose for your Photoshop document. And I'm going to press the tilde button, which is in the upper left-hand side of, like, I'm looking at a Mac keyboard. It's like a little squiggly. Does everybody find that? It's right below the escape button. And when I click that, this becomes really big, and that lets me, it's just kind of a magnification of that specific panel, the project panel. And I can go down here, down at the bottom, there's little icons that allow me to try different views. And I'm going to choose icon view so I can actually see the clips that I'm going to be working with. So I open this up, and you can see all of my files here. So I have like the totally merged one, and then I have each of those layers that we used in our Photoshop composite. So I'm going to create separate bins for these. So I'm going to open up down here on the lower right, there's something that looks like a file folder, and that's creating a bin, basically a way to categorize things. So we have a lot of duplicate stuff, so I'm going to go with flying buttresses. I'm going to make a folder for the buttresses. And I'm going to make a folder for the piers. And I'm going to say arch and roof. Okay, so now let's go through and just click and drag into these various folders. So I'm going to click and drag into the, oops, I did the wrong thing. So I'm going to move it back. Put this into the flying buttresses. So a lot, like I mentioned before, of video work, especially in the beginning, is just dealing with all of your material and finding ways to organize it, because it can get kind of complicated fairly quickly. So I'm gonna, oh, we have our arrows too. I'm going to make another one that's called arrows. And if this kind of way of looking at things is annoying, you can also just look at the titles, and that's where those labeled layers became really important. So that's in the list view down at the bottom. I'm gonna just finish putting these. Okay, so I've organized things into various folders. And now if I go back to list view, you can see that each one of these, so I just want to make sure that I should have the lower and upper in the buttresses. Okay, so you can see that all of these layers show up as pink. And what we want to do now is label them with different colors. And that's just going to help us, again, like visualize what it is that we're working with. So I can click on one and then hold down the shift key and then click on all of them. And then I'm going to right click and, right click, and you should see something that says label. And that means that you can change it to different colors. So for each of these categories, I'm going to make it a different color. So I'm going to go, you can be however you would like. And then the arch and the roof. And I'll go with yellow. Okay, so this is the organization here. I'm going to press that tilde button again. And what that's going to do is just minimize that screen. So you can see that we have all of this. And then at the very bottom, we have something that looks like a bunch of bar graphs, like a horizontal bar graph. And I want to double click on this because that is my layered document here. So I'm going to move my screen around just a little bit so I can have more space. I'm not really working with audio at this point. So you can see that here are all of different tracks. These are called tracks that are built basically layered on top of each other. So whatever is on the top track is like, you can imagine that being on the very top. Whatever is on the lower tracks, you can imagine being on the bottom of your scene. With looking at the tracks, you can do things like you can turn them off by clicking on the eyeball here. And so you can see sometimes which one you're working with a little bit better. But this was just a default in terms of setting things on the timeline, and we want to be a little bit more calculated with it. So I'm going to just click and drag until I select all of these clips, and then I'm going to press delete so that I can build it the way I like. Okay. So I have all of these here. The first thing that we're going to need is our building, which is over here. So you can see I drag this over, and now the building, the isolated building, shows up. What I want to do is if you can see here, that when I click on the edge of this clip, that a red arrow with a bracket on the back shows up. And what that means is that it's saying you can drag this to increase the duration of the clip. So I'm going to actually drag this out to be around a minute. Okay, so I have my building, and then let's start by thinking about the lower right and left buttresses. So not the flying ones, but so I'm going to do left lower. And you can see it's a different color because we did those labels, which are, again, really helpful. So I'm just clicking on that clip, right lower buttress, and clicking and then dragging out so that it's a minute long. And you can see as I add these, they start to show up on my screen. This is the program manager that lets you kind of see what would be the finished result if you would export right now. All right, so I'm gonna keep with the lower level because that's how I'm gonna build the scene. And I'm gonna choose my lower left and lower right. All right, and now we're ready for the flying buttresses. Lower left, lower right, upper left, upper right, and then I missed the upper piers. So I was like, oh no, actually I wanted to have something before the buttresses. I can just click and drag and then move. Once these are selected, I can move them up. So I know that I need to create space for both the left and right upper piers. So I'm gonna just drag them up 2 tracks. And now I have this space right here available for me. And I'm gonna do the upper left first. And my roof. So this would be, another version of what we made in Photoshop. So thinking about how we're going to animate, what we need to do is think about how we want those changes to occur. Basically, when you're working with time-based media, you move your timeline to an area where you want the change to begin. And we're going to use something called a keyframe to mark that for Premiere. And it's basically saying, watch out, we want to do something here. And then you make a change, then you move a timeline again, and then you put another keyframe and you do the change. And so this is saying to Premiere, start here, end here, figure out how to move things in between. So we're starting our beginning point and our end point. We'll also do things like use keyframes to hold a position. So saying that we want it to turn very opaque, and then we need to hold that opaqueness to then transform it later on. So we're going to be making keyframes to animate all of these different elements. So starting off, I think it might be cool to just see the building at the very beginning and then have the other pieces show up. So I'm going to click and drag. These are all of my building sites here. And I'm just going to drag them a little bit. Right, you can see in the gray, I'm moving at about 3 seconds. That seems good. So again, we can play this and we can see up here what that would look like. Like, boom, here they are. Okay, so starting with the building, I'm going to think about, we're gonna maybe have it zoom, like fade to black so that we can have the building not be apparent when we're doing our building block animation. So all the animations happen when you select a clip on your timeline. So not selecting it over here in your project space. I'm actually gonna kind of like minimize that a little bit. But selecting it on the timeline and then going up to your panel on the upper left-hand side and choosing Effect Controls, which should open something that looks like this. These might be collapsed. You might see something like that. But when you unfold them, you can see that there are different options that show up. these are the default keyframes, although in Premiere you can animate any kind of effect that you would want to use. You could slowly have things change to black and white. You could have it separate. You could have it mirror. There's all these really fun things that you can play around with. If you get into thinking about effects and what have you, you can go over here into the effects library and you can see all kinds of things that you can do you can have like cinematic looks and distortions and all these things that are really fun. You can also do that with audio as well.